All right, where did we leave off here? Season 10. Okay. And we're on season... Oh boy. It is May 2020. We are wrapping up what would end up being a low point during the year and what would eventually become the third season slump going into the future. It is also one of the worst times for community morale, with Season 10 feeling like a dud compared to the mostly praised Season 9 before it, with perhaps the start of the COVID-19 pandemic contributing to this. I'm in the middle of writing the Season of the Worthy wrap-up video, where I am the most pessimistic I have been in a very long time. Not buying the hype, telling people to wait to play, and just being generally disappointed with the state of the game. The vibes were very down as we continued to plug away at these seemingly random one-off story beats that weren't actually leading us down any real path forward. It felt like we had zero direction whatsoever. Usually we think of the final season in an expansion cycle as being the best one because it usually is, but that foundation hadn't really been laid yet, with a sample size of one, Season of Opulence, being the only data point, although a rather strong one. Despite that though, Season 11 has what I think is a solid launch. The story finally feels like it's dealing with the bigger threats and the bigger plot points we've come to know. Rasputin is really scared of the pyramid ships. Eris is doing stuff on Io with the Tree of Silver Wings, remember that? And it feels like we're actually progressing down some kind of a path, as opposed to going off on these random tangents. While the seasonal activity is basically Gambit the public event, people seem to like it way more than Season 10's public event activity. It's also at this time that Bungie experiments with Umbral Engrams, a system that gives more agency to players when it comes to getting loot, a system that will stick with us for a few seasons before we shift to something requiring less inventory management. With that though, came this weird hybrid sunsetting system where after a certain amount of time, a weapon or armor piece would no longer be able to be infused. This was to try to get people to look for new items as older ones phased out, but we'll get to sunsetting later in the video. A free dungeon also dropped, Prophecy, the third dungeon in the game, which I thought was pretty good. Part of that was because I was very underleveled for the experience, which brought it more in line with what a contest mode type experience feels like today. Unfortunately, Season 11 is a bit of a blur for me, being one of the only seasons that I did not do any kind of a seasonal recap of as we were preparing for Beyond Light, and because I personally checked out pretty early on in the season. Part of that was because Beyond Light got delayed, resulting in the first of many extended seasons that we would come to know, with Season 11 lasting over 150 days. Part of that was also because in September of 2020, all of my energy from the pandemic had been exhausted, and I went into a pretty deep depressive state, which resulted in one Destiny video in 30 days. I don't think about quitting content creation very often, but this was the worst I had felt in an incredibly long time, and all I wanted to do was quit. It didn't matter how much money I was making or how many freedoms I had, I was just tired of it. And, well, you could see how that turned out. Fortunately, Among Us was blowing up and was so popular that even an Among Us video on my channel was able to break 100,000 views, so that kept me afloat and active for a little bit. A few months later, I would be approached by a couple of people at Bungie wondering what my interest was in working on Destiny. And I told them that if you had asked me that during that depressive episode that I was having, I probably would have said very interested. There's no guarantee that it would have gone anywhere, but there's also a chance that I wouldn't be speaking to you right now. The final 4 to 5 months of 2020 was also when my friend and fellow YouTuber Jez and his wife Amy moved in with us as they prepared to go back to Australia. The only thing that I regret about the whole experience is just not doing more content and more things with them. We didn't realize what we had until it was far too late, but pandemic-induced depression and curfews didn't really help. But I did get married to my now wife, Danielle, 2 years to the day after we declared we were dating. It was a small wedding. We booked a nice hotel room in Seattle, We got a bunch of people on a video call, we had our friend Riley officiate, got Jez and Amy as witnesses, and then we DoorDashed some sushi to the hotel room to celebrate. October 15th, 2020, almost 5 years now. It is still insane to me to think about the fact that we started dating almost immediately after Forsaken dropped, because Forsaken feels forever ago. I love you, buddy. Beyond Light launches in November and comes with big changes, but one sticks out in particular: the Destiny Content Vault, aka the DCV. Beyond Light had a big engine update, but Bungie was also dealing with tons of bugs and issues from older content that wasn't really getting played anymore, in addition to a bloating file size for the game. As a result, Bungie would slowly rotate out older content to replace it with newer things. The DCV to this day is still very hated, although it seems more like a necessary evil for the game rather than something Bungie actively wants to do. But the DCV also meant that it was going to be impossible for players to play all of the game's content going forward. At the time, this wasn't as big of a deal, but as the game continued on, this meant that newer players would never be able to play the game from the start in terms of the story experience, which has proven itself to be quite a valuable thing to have in your game. This is a pretty significant reason, although not the only one, as to why it feels difficult for Bungie to get new players to Destiny, on top of a very intimidating and underdeveloped new player experience. Beyond Light also featured the first new subclass in the franchise's history, Stasis. Stasis ended up torturing the Crucible for about a year straight, which felt really unfortunate because the few months before Beyond Light felt like the best PvP had felt in a very long time, if not downright ever. I think Fallout still has a command in his chat that features a clip of me being infuriated by Shatter Dive in PvP. PvE-wise, I couldn't really tell you how much of an impact Stasis had because it didn't feel that significant, but it was still fun to play around with. Season 12, on the other hand, was one of the worst reviewed seasons of the entirety of the franchise. It did kickstart Crow's rise to fame within the game, but pretty much everything else about the season was flat other than getting Hawkmoon and the mission that came with it. At the end of 2020, Jez and Amy moved out of my house, and Danielle and I were incredibly sad about it. We watched Jez videos for 2 hours that night to dull the pain. And this is also when we would get Brimstone, our blue nose pit. Danielle had been hounding me since she moved in to get a dog, because she had a dog in the past and really wanted one. I did not want one because growing up, I had a cat. I shouldn't even say that. A cat lived in my parents' house for 16 years. It never loved anyone or anything. So I saw no value in having a pet. To me, a pet was just another responsibility in a very long list of responsibilities that I was already not keeping up with. I did not want the dog, but Danielle did a lot of research to find the perfect dog for us. Just wants to sit on the couch all day and cuddle and do nothing. And we got the dog. And slowly but surely, I fell in love with the dog. And now I love my big baby doggy Brimstone. Season 13 entered us into what I thought was a golden age of seasonal content and storytelling, although it would start to wear thin as time went on. The jump in quality from 12 to 13 was significant. This is when the story of the seasons started to feel a lot better. One thing would lead into another, and it felt like it had some relevance to the main overall story, or it just felt like the stories being told were a lot better. It was the season of enemy density as well. Bungie re-released Devil's Lair, and it was really fun because there were a lot of enemies to kill when normally we are very starved for those kills. We got battlegrounds, we got presage, a good story. This was a very pleasant surprise and the start of some really consistently good seasonal content. Season 14, aka Splicer, also got very high grades from the community, although I wasn't as sold. The main seasonal activity, Override, was fine, although I did like one of the expunge missions very much. This season started the relationship with Misrax, which I think a lot of people enjoyed, a continuation of the unification of different enemy factions for what would end up happening story-wise over the next couple of years. Armor Transmog was introduced into the game here as well, where you could fully customize your character's look outside of exotics. There was a seasonal cap on how many transmog currencies you could get though, a cap that is still in place today, despite heavy complaints at the time. Vault of Glass returned, and the introduction of Master Mode raids, which proved to be a more contentious issue than I was anticipating, and I had many a video on Vault of Glass. Bungie also dramatically reduced the level grind season over season, dropping from 50 levels to just 10 in yet another big quality of life change. Around this time, I moved out of my house in the greater Seattle area to a different house, also in the greater Seattle area. Danielle wanted to be a little bit closer to a certain part of town, so we packed it all up and moved right after I had air conditioning installed in that previous house. As of this video, I have now lived in Seattle for over 8 years, which is the second longest I have lived in one place in my entire life, the first being where I grew up back on the East Coast. I love Seattle, and if I can help it, I would love to stay, although some international plans are still technically on the table for the future. Season 15 was another extended 6-month season as The Witch Queen, the next expansion, was delayed to February. Fortunately, Bungie launched their 30th anniversary pack, which gave players a little bit more to go do to fill in the gap that we would have had, although with a somewhat hefty price tag. It brought back Gallarhorn, it gave us a wonderful first-time experience in the Grasp of Avarice dungeon, which was an ode to the loot cave from D1. It gave us Dares of Eternity, which was a ridiculous 9-themed game show-style 6-player activity hosted by Xur, and I thought it was a pretty solid update overall. Season 15 dealt with Mara and Savathun. Savathun has been locked away in a crystal, but has been controlling Osiris's body for a long time now. Savathun wants Mara to purge her worm, which, believe it or not, is not a euphemism, so we spend the season doing just that, and Savathun ends up escaping, leading us to the events of the Witch Queen. The activities in Season 15 were pretty enjoyable. We got 2 in Astral Alignment and Shattered Realm. I liked Astral Alignment a bit more than Season of the Splicers activity, and I thought was one of the best seasonal activities we've ever gotten, at least up until that point. Shattered Realm was more exploratory, looking for secrets and new pathways week over week. The weapons available were pretty not great, though. This was also the first time, pretty much ever, that fusion rifles in PvE were ever considered good, although that's mostly thanks to the seasonal artifact perk that boosted them up. This season also launched the timeline feature in-game. I was hyped as hell going into Season 15, and it delivered pretty well, capping off one of the best back-to-back-to-back season chains in the franchise. This is also when Vaultamania started up in a big way. I had been complaining a lot about other people begging and pleading for more vault space, and I started the vault auditing with fellow creator Fallout. This led to dozens of vault cleanings across the community, generating millions of views. It didn't happen on my channel, unfortunately, but I still had a lot of fun doing them. I had not anticipated the vault cleaning stuff to pop off nearly as much as it did. It was very surprising, but I'm very grateful to have been a part of it. The Witch Queen expansion finally shows up, and the campaign experience is a massive success. Bungie has finally introduced a hard mode version of the campaign called the Legendary Campaign, which aimed to give people a bit more of a challenging experience. Until Witch Queen, all campaigns, every single one, were stupidly easy from a gameplay perspective, which just kind of made the whole experience feel like you were on autopilot. It also undermined the intensity of the story beats. If our enemies were so pathetically easy to kill, it was hard for me to get immersed in the moment. To me, this was a massive negative with all Destiny campaigns. But Witch Queen? They nailed it. The Legendary Campaign difficulty was really fun, the reveals in the story were fun, and I went on record saying that, quote, "This was the most fun campaign that Bungie has ever put out, and I don't think it's even close," end quote, a take that I still think can hold up very well to this day. Bungie put that quote in their advertising campaign. The Hive have now gained light powers, Savathun has been spoiled on her true origins, we learn about the tippy top of the villain chain in The Witness, the main story is progressing, we are finally getting answers, we are finally developing some plot points, this is great. That being said, the rest of Witch Queen did feel a bit on the lighter side, although what didn't help was the fact that we just had 4 seasons worth of content removed from the game at the same time. This expansion cycle would also be the year we start getting the subclass 3.0 rollout, where the dated light subclasses would receive aspects and fragments like Stasis had, which greatly boosted build crafting potential. We started the year with Void. Weapon crafting also launched here, and it launched with a considerable amount of materials and currencies required in order to participate with the system. Now, I always thought of weapon crafting as more of a supplementary thing to the weapon grind experience versus having it just outright replace it, but as the year went on, Bungie would slowly chop out pretty much every unique currency related to the weapon crafting process, simplifying it considerably. Bungie would also introduce glaives, a melee/ranged weapon hybrid with the Witch Queen. It has been over 3 years since they were introduced, and despite countless buffs and quality of life changes, their adoption rate has still not been very high. Build crafting for them, though, has gotten a lot better, and some of the most powerful builds in the game right now use glaives, but it is a weapon that you need to have a little bit of confidence in using, otherwise it can be just very easy to run in and die. Season 16, launched with the Witch Queen, also deals with the Lucent Brood, aka the Hive with Light, where Keitel and the Vanguard team up to try to capture high-ranking officers and then read their minds with the Scions who can read their minds. We learn that they are harvesting Guardians. Well, okay, they're harvesting light to try to reclaim the Scarlet Keep and summon Savathun's throne world to it. Crow accidentally kills a Scion because he's trying to stop this whole reading their minds thing because like, it might be a war crime. And him and Saladin fight most of the season about this situation. Eventually, Saladin volunteers to join Keitel after she finds out about this incident instead of having Crow take the punishment. Season 16 also introduced more battlegrounds, which I thought were a pretty good addition to the Vanguard ops pool and would eventually be turned into new Grandmaster Nightfall strikes, although the community feedback on that has been pretty mixed. I thought that they were simply just the next evolution of the strike style experience, and honestly, if you just gave them some strike sounding name, I'm not sure people would be able to tell the difference. There is still a lot of debate about whether or not things like battlegrounds and future activities should be turned into GM Nightfalls, but I think they have been a great addition to that playlist. We also got Vox Obscura, a more combat-heavy exotic mission featuring some vehicle combat, and the first time we've been back to the original Mars in a very long time. Much like Witch Queen, this and a fair amount of this year's seasonal storytelling feels like we are on rails towards the finish line. And the rest of the year for me, content-wise, goes without too many incidents. But I had a moment in between season 15 and 16 where I kind of told myself to lock in. I hadn't been feeling super great about the YouTube grind, which is now a yearly ritual for me at this point, but I knew that at the very least, I was going to be sticking things out until the final expansion of this era. And if I was going to be around, I couldn't just slog through everything. I had to lock in and stay consistent. I basically signed a 3-year contract with a no trade clause in my own head. Make it to and through the final shape and reevaluate from there. Season 17, Season of the Haunted, brought back the Leviathan, which used to be a raid, now a patrol space. This episode heavily featured Callus and how he'll end up connecting to the Witness, in addition to Crow, Zavala, and Keitel coming face to face with some of their mental struggles. Keitel's issues with her father Gaul, Zavala and his wife and kid, and Crow with, well, what he used to be. The gameplay side, on the other hand, was a little different than usual since we didn't get an activity so much as we got a chunk of a destination with some things to do in it. I wasn't the most thrilled with this space. I thought the novelty wore thin as someone who ran a lot of Leviathan already, but Bungie would learn from this experience in the future. Solar 3.0 also launched here, bringing in a new era of self-healing potential, one that is, I would say, mostly still intact to this day. Season 18, Season of Plunder, also had that third season slump, although I thought this season was much better than a lot of people ended up giving it credit for. The premise of the season felt a little out of the ordinary though, collecting pieces of artifacts revealed to be pieces of Nezarec before Aramis could collect them herself in service of the witness. She's still very much trying to restore the dignity of her people, and she will do it by any means necessary. We also get some backstory on Misrax and an introduction to his daughter, Ido. The problem people had with the story here was that it did kind of feel like a filler episode on top of the continued week-over-week MacGuffin hunt. What wouldn't help is Nezarec would eventually come to life in the future in a way that did not please the community, nor myself. It felt like Nezarec should have been a bigger deal considering who he is. His name appeared on in-game items and in-game lore a lot, and his place in the lore was pretty high up, but he was otherwise unknown to the less invested player. The final subclass update came with this season as well, giving Arc Titans one of the best builds the game had ever seen up until that point, in addition to bolstering Arc Hunter's melee-centric playstyle, a build that to this day continues to be a top-tier setup. Gameplay-wise, I thought Catch Crash was a pretty good activity, although Expedition not as much. King's Fall also made its return to the game, and I had nothing but praise for how everything within was handled. I thought they did a great job restoring it. Divinity, a staple exotic in all raid groups, got nerfed this season, reducing the damage bonus that it provided on a target in half. I thought this nerf was completely justified, but it didn't matter how justified it was, people were still going to be mad that the game was going to get harder as a result. It didn't really get that much harder, and Divinity continues to be a very valued item in both raid and dungeon groups to this day. Otherwise, I was at a point where I just felt like I was going through the motions with the game. It was the same 3-month cadence of videos from me year in, year out. I think back to a 2021 State of Destiny video that I made where I say that innovation in Destiny can't be more Destiny, and yet that's what it still feels like. Season 19, on the other hand, whips us back into the main story. We got the Bray family in the mix, we got Rasputin, we got Mara, we got almost everyone. Rasputin the Warmind is revived to take control of the Warsat weapon system. There's drama with Clovis trying to become the new Warmind. Aramis is trying to help the Witness destroy the Traveler. The Traveler literally bails from Earth. I am locked back in as we take the story into the next expansion, Lightfall. Not only that, but every week felt like it had something substantial going on, so the momentum really kept up. Bungie took their first steps when it comes to power level adjustments this season, where you couldn't really over-level the seasonal activity, Heist Battlegrounds, which I thought was a great move. The activity was never so hard that you would get absolutely destroyed, but never so easy that you could just completely check out. And this system would get adopted to more parts of the game, in addition to not raising level caps nearly as often as they were, as Bungie sought to continue to address power level concerns that the community had. It was also this season that introduced one of the best quality of life changes in the franchise. Blue items no longer drop once you were a high enough level. A plague on postmasters everywhere. This was a godsend for inventory management, and I can't believe it's only been a couple of years since this update. 2022 had been the year of quality of life improvements for the game. System revamps, subclasses, weapon crafting, all of that. Another big thing coming was going to be the removal of Umbral engrams, moving to a more vendor-based reward system and removing seasonal currencies. And Bungie had acknowledged that the seasonal model was getting a little bit stale, even if the past 2 years were some of the most consistent years we've had in the franchise, if not the most consistent. It just takes a while to respond to that feedback though, as content needs to be built months in advance. So the earliest we would end up seeing any feedback would maybe be Season 22. Otherwise, the Witch Queen era of seasons felt very similar to the previous year, and my feedback has still generally been the same. More innovation, please. I was going into Lightfall pretty optimistic. The Witch Queen campaign was so good. Imagine Bungie getting another go at it. What other improvements could they make, if there were any to even make? They brought out all the characters for the previous season. The Witness is literally on our doorstep. New subclass coming out, the first in a couple of years. It's got a grapple move, dude. They're like, you can grapple the air and fling yourself around. What is there to not look forward to? And then Lightfall drops. I'm seeing tons of sponsored streams, more than I feel like I've ever seen in the past. Bungie is pushing Lightfall hard. Unfortunately, this was potentially one of the worst times to make such a push in modern Destiny history. I thought the campaign was very on par with Witch Queen as far as the legendary difficulty goes, the gameplay experience. But the giving and taking of the new Strand subclass during the campaign never let people find any kind of a rhythm with it. Not to mention that half of the campaign missions felt like it was based on trying to learn Strand and what it was actually about, and not with the actual plot. Like, dude, the Strand stuff should be happening in the background. Why is this taking priority? Why is this half the campaign? And then the actual plot, like, what the hell was even going on? What the hell is the radial mast? Why is any of this stuff actually important? This is not good. We had two new characters in Rohan and Nimbus. Rohan died so quickly into the experience and was featured so rarely that his death had basically no impact, and Nimbus felt incredibly immature for the situation at hand, which came off more annoying than charming. They did eventually mellow out in the post-campaign quests, but that was a bit late for people. And then the raid, Root of Nightmares. Beautiful environment, but these fights are just pathetic, man. At least there was like maybe some kind of a payout with Nezarec coming to life and seizing the plunder. But there were very few redeeming qualities about this raid on the gameplay side of things, where I unleashed a scathing review of this place, the most brutal feedback I have had for a raid ever. At least the raid exotic, Conditional Finality, was good, arguably the best raid exotic in years. There were a couple of good things though. Bungie revamped the champion stun system to now include subclass effects like Ignite, Jolt, Freeze to make fighting them way more enjoyable. They also introduced loadouts in-game so that you could swap weapons and armor without the use of a third-party tool and without needing to be in certain places within the game. Very, very convenient. But overall, this was not good, and what was especially awkward was that Bungie said they needed an expansion in between Witch Queen and Final Shape to do their story, which was this, which just left people even more confused. Hell, even the opening and closing cutscene to Lightfall just looked like they were split in half from what looked like originally one cutscene. Despite all this, viewership on the channel during the first month, maybe 2 months of Lightfall was actually pretty good. Some of the higher numbers I've seen in a very long time. And I think the first couple of months of Lightfall, content-wise for me, was really strong. I thought I was dropping some really good videos, some of the best stuff I had made in a very long time. But the fall-off hit insanely hard. Reviews for Lightfall were not good, sentiment was dropping every single day, and it would only get worse over time. Later in the year, layoffs would hit Bungie, with them announcing that sales were running 45% below projections for the year, thanks to lower than anticipated pre-order numbers for Final Shape and lower game engagement. Bungie had just been bought by Sony right before Witch Queen for $3.7 billion, and while they were purchased likely for more reasons than just owning the Destiny IP, this was not a good look for both Bungie and Sony. And to top it all off, Lance Reddick, aka the voice of Zavala, passed away a mere 2 weeks after the launch of Lightfall. He would be replaced by Keith David in the next expansion, but Bungie would not have Keith David re-record lines that were already in the game or already recorded. This was an incredibly devastating loss, not only for the Destiny community, but the greater film industry at large. Season 20, aka Season of Defiance, came with Lightfall and had the merit of being arguably the best season to launch with an expansion. So that was nice. I thought the activities weren't too bad, but the story ended up killing off Amanda Holiday, a character that's been with us for a very long time, a non-Guardian character. Her and Crow had been forming a relationship over time, and this was pretty devastating for him, although if you never listened to the radio messages of him talking about it, you wouldn't have even known that he cared that much. I wasn't the hugest fan of how she died, mainly because there felt like no point to risking non-Guardian lives in the way that they did. Most of the season consisted of pushing back the Shadow Legion Cabal and saving all the people that they have been capturing. We got Defiant Battlegrounds in Season 20, which I thought, again, were pretty solid. At the time, saying that some of the most fun combat rooms in the game were in this activity. Avalon, the exotic mission, also featured some really fun combat arenas, giving us Vexcalibur, which is now one of the best glaives in the game. Season 21 comes in, Season of the Deep. And I actually think this is a pretty decent season overall, giving praise to Deep Dive, Bungie's attempt at a roguelite mode, emphasis on light, although with some pretty good enemy density and encounters. The other activity, Salvage, was a 6-player activity, although I did not play that one nearly as much. Sloan is apparently alive, still on Titan, dealing with the Taken and speaking to a creature who would give more insight into the Witness by the end of the season. Bungie also introduced fishing here, which wasn't really required for much during the season. It was just a fun optional minigame experience, although it did get taken away when all of this content eventually left. Ghosts of the Deep was a fantastic first-time dungeon experience as well. The weapons of the season left a bit to be desired though. Bungie used the Taken color scheming this season for some of the weapons, and most, if not all of those weapons were pretty average. Season of the Deep also had a lot of networking issues with the game for about a 2 to 4 week period. Lots of extra maintenance required, servers were down much more often, things were just breaking left and right. This led to a divisive video of mine called "You Don't Know Anything About Game Engines." I made this video to try to combat some of the armchair developers and engineers out there claiming that Bungie should switch their game engine to something different, as if that would alleviate all of the problems that the game has. I know that the Destiny engine has its own limitations, but saying a swap like this would just fix all of it felt like a very ignorant take. This video got mostly good feedback though, which I owe in part to 3 anonymous non-Bungie developers that I got to speak with in order to get more insight on the topic of game engines. It was also around this time that I did 3 things. Number 1, I finally came to terms with the fact that I needed to take a sabbatical after the Final Shape expansion. Something needed to give in my life, and if there was a time to take a break, it was going to be after this expansion. But the Final Shape would end up getting delayed. So I never actually took this sabbatical, and I still have not rescheduled it. In fact, I did something that would end up being the opposite of a sabbatical, and that's taking on even more work. I get extreme anxiety over taking such long breaks because even though I know it's probably not true, I still think that if I disappeared for a couple of months, I would just be replaced, and my brain thinks that I'm only relevant because I continue to pump out videos with some amount of regularity. The second thing was taking on more sponsors. The initial reason was so that I could pay myself during the sabbatical that I was going to take, so that I would still have some money coming in during the months that I would be gone. I had always looked at sponsors in a very snobby way for most of my career, but sponsors and sponsored content had become so ubiquitous in everyday YouTube life that even after I did the sponsors I needed to do so I could pay myself, I continued to take them, although more on that in a few minutes. After getting an agent, I realized what I had been missing out on monetarily. I hated trying to negotiate with ad agencies and trying to figure out how much I should charge and how much I was actually worth. Getting an agent showed me what I'm actually worth to sponsors, and I cringe thinking back to some of the deals that I took and how little they ended up paying me, if they paid anything at all. I've been with my agent for a few years now, and it's been going fantastic. If you are some kind of a content creator yourself, you are probably worth more than you think, and you should get an agent, commission be damned. In retrospect, I should have embraced sponsors way sooner because I gave up a very significant amount of money over the years, and I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that getting more money for 1 or 2 sponsors than an entire month's worth of YouTube ad revenue isn't appealing. I gave up 5-figure deals for Raid Shadow Legends back when they were just handing out money. In 2024, I made more with sponsored content and partnerships than I did the entirety of my YouTube ad revenue for the year. So either I'm getting some great deals or my YouTube ad revenue actually sucks. In fact, 2024 was my best year in terms of revenue ever, although that was bolstered by some other once-in-a-decade events, despite me plateauing on YouTube. I've seen very little growth over the past 3 years, to the point where I am not sure there is even much of a new audience to capture for Destiny as a creator. This has unfortunately made me a bit more complacent in my content creation life, but that complacency has slowly been getting replaced with video ideas that feel like I'm getting back to the reason I wanted to make a YouTube channel in the first place, although not necessarily about Destiny. The third thing was dropping Destiny 2 from nearly every single video title, embracing more modern YouTube titling, and getting a little more creative with my thumbnails. I can no longer just put Datto's thoughts in a video title and have the video get hundreds of thousands of views. YouTube was shifting dramatically away from the subscription feed and more to the home feed, and I needed to adapt, at least a little bit. I do think that this has resulted in some more memorable titles, and my thumbnail game has definitely improved, although how much that's resulted in more viewership is honestly anyone's guess. Okay, back to 2023. Wow, I can already hear my voice going. Season of the Witch was up next, and Eris had a fantastic performance in this episode, pretty much all around, which made this more fun than it maybe should have been. We tithed to Eris, giving her power so that she would eventually kill Savathun to siphon a bunch of her power as well. The seasonal activities were both not too bad, with Bungie experimenting with an endless mode option for Altars of Summoning, where you wouldn't have to leave the arena after you completed a round. And we also had Savathun's Spire, which I found enjoyable, but I don't think either activity was super top tier. Crota's End re-released here as well, bouncing back from a brutally simple Root of Nightmares and providing something much more in line for what hardcore raiders were expecting when it came to a raid race. Bungie also had the Imbaru Engine, a series of puzzles that started out pretty easy but then went into puzzle overdrive towards the end. This culminated in a giga puzzle that was very difficult to solve on your own, which I found very satisfying, although I didn't solve it exactly completely on my own. But here is where the layoffs mentioned earlier happen. Sentiment is at all-time lows. Again, we have to hear about leadership and management continuing to fail the employees, all stuff that I had been hearing for several years now. Final Shape gets delayed after it is reported that it's getting good, not great, feedback, so Bungie has 3 months to try to whip this thing into shape. These are the first layoffs that I think we've seen for Bungie since the franchise started. Season of the Wish, the final season in this format, was yet again another super extended season as the Final Shape was delayed, with it lasting just over 6 months. This season's story featured Riven, or summoning her spirit, or something like that, as a last resort to get into the Traveler portal that opened up as a result of Lightfall. Week over week, we collected hidden Ahamkara eggs that she had stowed away, hidden in secret, while also learning of her partner, Taranis, who I keep wanting to call Tanaris after the World of Warcraft zone, who sacrificed himself in order to save the eggs in the first place. The Coil was introduced this season, which I thought was one of the best seasonal activities we've ever gotten. It featured some fun encounters, good enemy density, a good amount of loot, including a secret loot room if you got enough points, although the points mainly came from scattered jars in the arena and not really from fighting. What also helped were the weapons from this season. 3 of my top 5 from the year released during this season, so the loot chase was back on. Despite community morale being on the level of Curse of Osiris or Season of the Worthy, potentially even lower, Season of the Wish had some very good grades from the community in terms of a seasonal ranking versus all other seasons. And I think that was because we had issues with what was going to be happening in the future, not really with what we had been experiencing in-game at that moment. It was concerns about the layoffs. It was concerns about Bungie not being able to do enough to guide this story to a satisfying conclusion. At the end of the day, I thought the Lightfall era of seasons were some of the most novel seasons we've ever gotten and might be the best era of seasons in the franchise. It's just unfortunate that it came during a time where a lot of people had checked out of the game due to Lightfall's underwhelming experience and the overwhelmingly negative morale in the community. At the end of 2023, with the layoffs, the bad news, the lack of confidence, I secretly made a second channel called Hello Datto that would post only non-Destiny content. I did this for two reasons. Number one, YouTube's algorithm. Over the years, YouTube has been pushing more and more people away from subscriber feeds and more towards the homepage in an attempt to keep people on the website as long as possible, feeding you endless video suggestions. And when a creator posts a video, if it's getting a lot of attention, YouTube will push it more on the homepage. If it doesn't, they won't post it as much. This is why there's been a massive uptick in comments like, "Oh, I didn't even know you posted that video." It's because barely anyone uses the subscription feed anymore. And non-Destiny content on the channel usually performed badly, which meant that not only would people not see the video even pop up, but it could hurt future videos' performance because YouTube might not push follow-up videos as aggressively to people's feeds if they hadn't watched a video from that channel in a little while. The second reason was the main reason though. I really thought that Final Shape was gonna bomb. Okay, maybe not bomb, but I thought it was going to be Lightfall-esque. I thought people would play it would be okay at best, and then people would disappear. And I really just wanted a backup plan for myself. I really thought that there was a good chance that my audience would completely collapse as a result of the Final Shape not getting to the level that I thought it needed to get to. Morale was incredibly low. There's bad news everywhere. It was hard to stay positive about what was happening. And at that point, I'd rather just make a new channel, form a new identity for myself, and start over versus trying to convert the Destiny channel into a variety channel while trying to work against the YouTube algorithm, which that's a losing battle. And the first 4 months of that channel went really well. There wasn't that much going on with Destiny at the time, so I had the time to invest into playing more variety stuff, coming up with higher concept video ideas, trying to challenge myself a bit more on the creative side. I worked with a couple of editors to try to have 2 to 3 videos going up per week. I put a lot of time, money, and effort into that channel when it first started, and it was going insanely well. Growth was great, views were solid, I was learning. I felt like a real content creator for the first time in years. And then something happened that caused me to abandon that channel for 4 months, which was both great and awful. Into the Light launched in April 2024. Into the Light was a last hurrah celebration before we went into the Final Shape, although it was probably also here because Bungie didn't want us having absolutely nothing while the expansion was delayed. But Into the Light was one of the best content drops that Bungie has ever done for this game. In my November 2023 layoffs video, I said that I thought it would be insane to expect much from Bungie in this time period due to the fixes they needed to do with Final Shape, on top of making new stuff to fill the gap. And I could not have been more wrong, leading me to believe that maybe things in game dev world can move a little bit faster than I've been led to believe, although this was a very special scenario. We got Onslaught, a new horde mode, which the community had been requesting for a very long time. We had 12 fan-favorite weapons come back and get revamped with new perks, and the ability to get a rare cosmetic version of them, labeled as a holofoil weapon. We had Pantheon, a raid boss gauntlet mode that added a boss each week and increased the difficulty. We were getting news drops about Final Shape. I was busy during these 2 months. Bungie also announced the unsunsetting. Bungie was now going to allow all weapons from every era to be able to be brought up to max level again. Granted, we had power crept well past anything these old weapons were capable of, on top of nerfing the main problem children in the Recluse and Mountaintop. I dropped an apology video after multiple years of telling people to delete old, unusable garbage from their vaults. This event was such a massive morale boost to the community, and people were having a great time. I even uncanceled my annual trip to GCX, formerly Guardian Con, which started as a Destiny community meetup. I wasn't gonna go, anticipating that things were going to be bad enough that instead of meeting fans, it was just going to be a 2-day eulogy for Destiny, and I just didn't want to be there for that. A big milestone for me happens here as well. I hired an editor, Vada. For the first time in 11 years, someone else would be helping me with making content. I am an insane control freak, or at least I used to be. I always wanted everything to be 100% how I would have done it. But I remember the first few videos I sent to Vada were basically like 90 to 95% of the way there when I first received them. With a little more experience, we could get that to 95, 99%, and now a lot of the time, basically 100%. Plus, Vada could add some extra flair and flourish to the videos, things that I typically didn't have extra time to spend on. It has been a great year having an editor. I pay him to be my full-time editor, and I pay my 2 main Twitch moderators a monthly stipend. So if you're wondering where a lot of that sponsor money has been going, well, now you know. I had struggled with the idea that having an editor meant that some of the Datto does part of the channel would diminish and that people would think less of me for not doing all of my own videos. But after that long and after wanting to make some life changes, I just needed to do something. If anything, I think people think more of me for making good life decisions, and I don't think the quality of the content has diminished in the slightest. If anything, having an editor has given me more time to work on the writing and the research parts or side projects versus having to then also edit them. After a great 2 months, the final shape arrives, and Bungie mostly sticks the landing. I had my gripes about the first half of the campaign, how slow it felt, but the second half feels like it kind of made up for it. Cade is back for one last hurrah. We have the old tower back, sorta, but not really, but sorta. Prismatic subclasses are obliterating everything in sight, and Salvation's Edge, the final raid of this era, absolutely destroys everybody, completely flipping the Root of Nightmare's raid easy narrative on its head, giving us the most brutal day 1 raid in the history of the game. A feat that I never thought would be topped over Last Wish. For one brief month, I was in the top 10 most subscribed Twitch channels. The final shape gets some good launch reviews, and it feels like things are stable for the first time in a really long time. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't going to be as bleak as I thought. And just when it felt like everything was going well, and just when I uncanceled my GCX trip, more layoffs. Way more brutal than last time. The final shape did well, but not well enough, it would seem. Many other Bungie projects are canceled, as it appears that they overextended on that front, spending too much on many other projects while their main moneymaker wasn't bringing in the cash like it used to. Marathon, Bungie's other game currently in development, was the only surviving project. Although one other project Bungie was working on did survive, it was just taken over by Sony, including some of the employees. The Destiny 2 game director, Joe Blackburn, had already left a few months back and passed the torch. The best 4-month spree of Destiny in a long time resulted in some of the worst layoffs of the year. And just like that, we were back to being worried. Bungie would discontinue the typical seasonal wording for their new releases, switching to episodes, although the differences between the two felt not as strong as Bungie felt like they led people to believe in their initial marketing. These episodes were not linked in story. Each episode could be completed in any order. This is because they were all summing up some plot points from different storylines in the game, wrapping things up before we moved to presumably a new story arc for the next however long it's going to be. Each episode dealt with an object called an Echo, which all spawned after the Witness was destroyed. Episode 1 dealt with the Vex, Failsafe, and Maya Sundaresh. Episode 2 dealt with the Crow and Fickrel storyline from way back in the day, and Episode 3 dealt with the Hive family trio of Savathun, Xivu, and Oryx. I know that at the time of release of this video, all of this stuff is very fresh, but I'm still going to give some detail in case people watch this in the far future. Episode 1's story dealt with Saint 14's crisis of faith of himself, realizing he's just a copy of a copy, is he even real, that kind of stuff, while Osiris tries to keep him together. At the same time, we were dealing with Maya Sundaresh, who had come and gone throughout the years, and her storyline attempting and failing to find the perfect version of her wife before Maya went a little crazy. Bungie did some cool things here. They gave a section of Nessus a complete geometry makeover, but it was only while you were within the episode ecosystem. It never actually changed out in the normal world. And we got to go into the core of Nessus, which did feature some cool set pieces, and I thought one of the new activities they made, Enigma Protocol, was a pretty neatly designed piece of content, although I'm not super confident in its replayability factor. But all of this still felt like Seasons. It's just that it didn't feel like we needed to go collect 6 to 8 pieces of a MacGuffin week over week to keep us occupied. Around here is where Bungie hinted at what was come post-episodes. Not Destiny 3, not that I was expecting it, but the removal of annual expansions as well, which we learned was going to be now in favor of 2 semi-annual releases, with the seasonal format as we knew it gone. On top of that, it seemed that no gameplay system in Destiny was safe. Bungie wanted to make some big changes to armor, weapons, how we interact with the game on a day-to-day basis. We'd have to wait a few months before any more information would be revealed though, but at least I could point to something for all the people who would eventually come ask me about if Bungie was still making Destiny content or if the final shape was the end. Episode 2 claimed the 3rd season slump title from before, with this, to me, being the weakest of the episodes. The plotline was based on Fickrell and Crow's relationship way back in Forsaken, content that is no longer playable in the game. Fickrell has the Echo. He's being bad, go stop him. Despite this, it felt like we spent more time dealing with the Ido, Aramis, and Misrax plotline. Misrax is infected with the Nezarec curse, and we spend a lot of time trying to rid him of this while enlisting Aramis's help. Fickrell and Crow, I think, have one interaction during most of the episode, and Crow low rolls a persuasion check, so that was kind of the end of that. We eventually gain the ability to purge the curse in combination with getting the Echo from Fickrell, and Aramis is chosen to receive its power, which she will use to try to restore her people, flying off to Reese. Bungie said no to crafted weapons for this episode, wanting to restore some of the loot chase that we used to have, but didn't really offer enough loot for people to chase. The activities were fine. Onslaught also returned with some additions, but people were not as entertained because the loot wasn't nearly as good as it was with Into the Light, nor was it nearly as plentiful. This, on top of a more convoluted currency system, did not lead to a lot of engagement. Around this time, Destiny Rising was announced and made playable in the form of a closed alpha. Destiny Rising is a mobile game made by NetEase in collaboration with Bungie using the Destiny IP. It takes place in an alternate Destiny universe and has some new characters, and after putting a decent amount of time into the game, I actually thought it was kind of good. I was very surprised at how it still very much felt like Destiny, although it helps that a lot of Destiny assets were made available to NetEase. A closed beta just started up as I was recording this after months of silence. I am wondering how it'll all turn out. It is a gacha game, and I feel like if there's something the Destiny community probably hates, it's gacha games. But it's also not a game that is necessarily designed with current Destiny players in mind in the first place, so I guess we'll see how it goes. Episode 3 launches in February 2025, with the story concluding a couple of months later. Bungie breaks out the All-Stars. Savathun, Xivu, and Oryx are all on display, going through some difficult family times. The Echo awakens the memory of Oryx, and Oryx has to now deal with this new world he's been reintroduced to since dying. Things have changed significantly, and he's having difficulty coping. Meanwhile, Eris gains a throne world and still wants vengeance on all of them, so she interferes with Savathun as much as possible, who really doesn't like that. We trap Oryx in a prison in her throne world, but he eventually escapes, and then we destroy him once and for all. Bungie brings back the Dreadnought a very well-liked destination from Destiny 1, and makes a lot of improvements to the patrol as an activity situation they did with Season of the Haunted and the Leviathan. There's more encounter spaces, more roguelike elements, no health regeneration, secrets and collectibles to go hunt down, and way more loot. Bungie learned some loot lessons from Episode 2, being so much more generous with loot this time around, although still uncraftable, and also having a more simplified currency system to operate. Right before Rite of the Nine, the year's Into the Light style pre-expansion event, they dropped a huge community chess-themed puzzle on us involving collecting thousands of images, which you could only get by solving a sequence of 27 chess puzzles with a limited number of pieces. This is the first time since Corridors of Time back in Season 9 that we've had a puzzle on this level. The Embaro engine of Season 22 was kinda close, but it didn't take a community-wide effort to then have to piece together all of these different things to get the rewards. Rite of the Nine, again, 2025's Into the Light style content drop, lands a bit softer than its predecessor. 3 dungeons, Spire of the Watcher, Prophecy, and Ghost of the Deep, have been slightly revamped with updated loot pools, and they've been made free for a couple of months. A new easy mode was introduced for people to get into this content for the first time, and a new hard mode was introduced, trying to mirror the contest mode that we get for the first day of a new dungeon or a raid. But it doesn't exactly have the same appeal as something like Into the Light, which is still one of the best updates we've ever gotten. The loot isn't as good, the activities aren't as replayable, so I haven't been as engaged as much as I thought I was going to be. Although that doesn't really bother me too much, as it leaves me more time to prepare for the Edge of Fate expansion. And finally, we get the reveal for what's to come. The Edge of Fate and Renegades will be our first 2 expansions, with expansions estimated to be slightly bigger than a Rise of Iron type experience. Each expansion will have a mid-season update for a total of 4 big patches during the year. Renegades is heavily inspired by Star Wars, which already has led to a lot of commentary on what it'll actually be like, but we only have a 10-second teaser to go on, so I'm not investing too much time myself. For the Edge of Fate, a new character has been introduced in Lodi, who looks like if you took almost every male Destiny content creator with brown hair and smashed them together. The main theme appears to be based around the Nine, a faction that's been in the game since the beginning of the franchise, but one that we haven't had a ton of interaction with. We're getting tons of system changes and updates, stuff that I'm sure we've discussed up until the release of this video. And as of May 31st, the day that I am finalizing this script, that's where we've landed after 12 years. The last 5 years have obviously had a lot of ups and downs for the community. We've experienced some of the highest highs since Forsaken, and experienced some pretty new lows as well. 5 years ago, I said that if Bungie was anything, they were resilient, but that We're Listening wasn't going to cut it anymore. And yet, sometimes I still feel like I can use that exact line over and over in my feedback. And in watching the 7-year retrospective that I made 5 years ago, I find that a lot of what I said about myself still applies to me. Burnout creeps in far more often. I'm trying to take more time away for myself. I can't and don't want to spend 12 hours a day every day gaming and making content. And 5 years later, I am indeed still not qualified to do that much else in terms of a career. Although agencies hit me up, I'm going to be a great consultant one day. When it comes to content creation for this game, I'm not going to lie to you. I haven't really been enjoying it as much as I have in the past. That's mainly because I don't feel like I get to actually sit and enjoy the game anymore. Everything is merely an arms race to get the first batch of videos out. Everything is about consuming content as fast as humanly possible, or at least that's what it feels like anyway. I just feel like a content farm a lot of the time, and day to day, a lot of Destiny content creation is just kind of job-like now. And it's not that I'm not passionate about making sure my content is as good as it can be, it's that I'm just not as passionate about what is being made because of the constant push to just get the next video out to people as soon as possible. I don't get the time to be passionate, I just have to get it out the door. And all my creative energy is going towards non-Destiny projects because I've just been trying to spread my wings a little more over the past year, trying to continuously challenge myself as a creator, and that challenge for me has been outside of the Destiny space. I would say that there isn't that much challenge for me remaining in being a Destiny creator, which has made me feel stuck mentally, just going through the motions, and I don't want to feel like that 100% of the time. I have two 10,000 word scripts for non-Destiny videos currently in the works. I just finished one that was 16,000 words, spending multiple months to complete them. I have a real passion for these other projects of mine that make me feel like an actual YouTuber for the first time in years. That same passion that initially brought me to doing Destiny coverage, that spark for making videos. That being said, maybe I just feel like this because as of me writing this, I have had a very relaxed April and May 2025, playing Blueprints, Expedition 33, Doom the Dark Ages, being out of town, and just generally being detached from Destiny since there hasn't been a whole lot to discuss while we've been in this end of expansion era purgatory. My mindset does flip-flop a lot depending on what I'm doing content-wise at any given moment. April and May, well, I've been pretty hands-off with Destiny because I told myself a couple of years ago that I wasn't going to stress myself out trying to come up with videos when there wasn't that much to discuss. And being in this purgatory between old and new eras of the game, I wasn't going to burn out right before the new stuff started because we have a lot to discuss. Viewership has been down to probably the worst it's ever been as of me writing this, so that's also having an effect on me, but that's also self-imposed. Like, I haven't had much stuff to get people excited about, so hopefully it'll bounce back with the new expansion news and its release, and you get it. But worst of all is I want the best of all worlds, staying active with Destiny content and streaming and my side projects, knowing that the only way to make that happen is by spending all of my time doing it. And as I get older, I'm 36 in September, I have been trying to set more limits on how much time I spend working in a day. I still work pretty much every day because you just gotta in this line of work, but I'm setting stricter hours for myself. As I mentioned earlier, I hired an editor last year to help me full-time, and that's been a huge boon to me to either multitask a bit more or it can just free up my night so I can spend my time the way that I want to spend it instead of being buried in more work. But I still value having a direct connection with this channel, still having my personal touch in most things that I do, so don't expect that to go anywhere. All that being said, even a lot of the Edge of Fate previews haven't really gotten me that jazzed up, although that's less to do with the game itself and what's been revealed, and more to do with the fact that it feels like this community will never, ever, ever be happy with this game. At this point, it doesn't feel like anyone will be happy, period. It's like people are actively trying to be as miserable as possible. Conversations always drifting negatively, every Destiny stream turning into a space to vent frustration instead of actually being excited for literally anything at all. Bungie trying to restore the loot chase to their loot game, being met with vitriol, every single thing scrutinized to within an inch of its life. It's gotten to the point where I don't even really try to argue my point of view anymore because I've just stopped caring about a lot of stuff as a result. I know I will never change anyone's opinion on anything anymore, but the same most often goes in the other direction as well. I'm never going to sit here and say that the game is perfect, but the expansion isn't even out yet, and people are acting as if it's going to be the worst thing to happen to the franchise ever. And dealing with that day after day, stream after stream, video after video is really not fun. It's exhausting. It is exhausting. I get no joy from that experience whatsoever. It gets to the point where I dread booting up Destiny on stream because I know the next 4 hours is just going to be a lot of complaining or people saying, why is bro still playing this game, and game is dead, and dude is a shill, and like whatever else. And it's not like I'm even posting rage bait to get views to go along with like community sentiment either, because that's just not how I really operate anymore. It just makes me want to distance myself, even if I still really love playing this game. So if it seems like I've been a bit less engaged than usual, it's because recently being engaged with this community has just made me really sad. And that does not make for passionate or good entertainment. My next big Destiny project is going to be an attempt to make some kind of a new / returning player guide that is comprehensive for this next era. I want new players to be able to search almost anything about this next era of the game and have a Datto video pop up to answer those questions. Probably a big undertaking, but I'm going to give it a shot. I've already started writing. 2025 for me has been the year of self-improvement, and I've actually been following through. I get up at 7 to 7:30 in the morning when I used to get up at 10:30. I'm working out again a few times a week. I'm on a new skincare routine. I got a better haircut. I willingly read a book for the first time in my life. Danielle has been getting into the motion capture world and has already gotten 3 opportunities to do paid motion capture, twice of which being with Bungie doing Destiny emotes. I think the first batch comes out in Renegades though, so hang on to your money for a little bit longer. It's also been a year where I've wanted to reach out of the bubble that I've been in, collaborating with creators outside of the Destiny space, and that's gone pretty well so far too. The last 5 years of my life have been pretty good to me. I got married, I've made new friends, but the one constant has always been content. Even though the channel isn't really growing anymore, it hasn't for a while now, I appreciate that I still have an audience that is willing to watch my videos and still cares about what I have to say about this game. I learned this lesson a long time ago. I'm staying focused on the people who are here, not the people who aren't. It's nice to grow, but I'm not really sure how much of a new audience is out there to really capture. So in the meantime, I will do what I can to make sure that I continue to entertain those of you who have stuck with me this entire time, or maybe you just subscribed and found my videos last week. I will always appreciate everything that you have given me in my life. I am so much more successful than I ever thought I would be by several magnitudes, and I will never be able to pay that back. Thank you for everything. Thank you for watching. I will see you next time.